This podcast with our old friend from Smash Hits, Neil Tennant, turned out to be so involved and engaging that we're putting it out in two parts. So here, recorded in a slightly echoey but atmospheric room in London's Somerset House, is part one. Part two to follow shortly.
You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
Are you on? You recording?
I think we are, Mark, yes.
Hello, hello, hello.
1 2 1 2 2 2 2
2 2.
2 2 2. Yeah, fine.
1 isn't this a lot of fun? What was that? Spinal Tap, wasn't it?
That was it, really.
I think so. Are you there?
Spinal Tap just reissued.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, welcome to another edition of Word in Your Ear. And David and I are sitting here looking at an old copy of Smash Hits from January 1983, Malcolm McLaren on the cover. And we have fallen through a wormhole in time.
We have.
Back to the office where Electric Avenue by Eddie Grant is probably playing. Too Shy by Kajagoogoo. You can hear the rattle of typewriters, the constant ringing of telephones. There is the scent of cigarette smoke and instant coffee. And next to us, as he is now, was the news editor of Dr. Bits. Dr. Bits of the Bits section. Neil Tennant. And Neil, it's lovely to see you again.
Lovely to see you.
Fantastic. And I just what you would have been working on was the happy birthday section. Let me remind you that David Bowie was 36. Jimmy Page, 39.
We probably thought that was old.
We did.
Was Jimmy Page
39.
ever 39?
39. Rod Stewart was 38. That seems ancient. Suggs, 22. Chaz Smash, 24. Jeremy Healy of Hazy Fantasy, 21.
Gosh.
Isn't that amazing?
Pop stars are young again, though, aren't they? Some of them are, anyway.
Are they? Well, there's every generation nowadays, isn't there?
There is,
So it's kind of it's completely full. So we were just talking about before we started recording how our paths originally crossed. What's your version?
So I had worked for Madonna Educational Publishers. Before that I worked for Marvel Comics. And then I left Madonna Educational was owned by the British Print Corporation. We were in a huge industrial dispute, and the company was bought by Robert Maxwell. I was one of the local NUJ chapel heads. What was it called? Father of the chapel.
Yes.
And anyway, so Robert Maxwell, we got reinstated by Robert Maxwell, and I didn't want to work for Robert Maxwell, so I got offered a job at ITV Books doing TV tie-ins. At which point I thought I should buy a TV. I didn't have one. And this is why my knowledge of 70s television is still very poor. And then I decided we would do a sort of tie-in brochure book thing about Madness's film, Take It or Leave It. And to design it, I approached the editor of The Face, Steve Bush. The editor of The Face, the designer of The Face.
Designer of The Face, he was, that's right.
Steve Bush. Remember, The Face was achingly cool when it first came out, and sort of more or less remained that for a while. And anyways, I met Steve Bush at the offices of a magazine called Smash Hits, which I have to be honest, I wasn't aware of.
Really?
I wasn't aware of, and I thought, it's this magazine with lyrics and things. And
so you came into the office then?
I came into the office.
Did you walk or did you meet us? Did Steve introduce you?
I don't remember.
Carnaby Street, this is.
I know when I did come in. Anyway, I'll come into that. And anyway, so we did. I got Adrian Thrills of the Enemy to do the interviews. I got my friend Eric Watson to take all the pictures of each member of Madness. Eric had been, I'd known for several years, and he'd been towards the art college and then photography. He worked with Red Saunders, photographer, didn't he? And he learned, and so he was great at lighting. And so he did the pictures. It was one of his first professional commissions. And I brought the pictures in Steve Bush. This is probably the first time. And it's for Steve Bush to look at, to put in, to do the layout with. And you said, these pictures are great. The music industry is going to eat him up. About Eric Watson.
Oh, right.
How right you were. He did lots of covers for Smash Hits. He transformed Smash Hits.
Yeah.
He really did.
Well, of course, you'd only just started commissioning pictures.
Yeah, it's probably true.
Yeah.
Because when you took over as editor, you were still in the world of free.
You were using 35mm.
What have you got?
LFI.
Yeah.
No, Eric is the first person probably to be regularly commissioned to shoot covers.
Yeah.
I would have thought. He had a very distinct style, and it just suited Smash Hits.
And it helped to create the Smash Hits style.
Oh, definitely.
And then we did that, and then we did the Tis Was yearbook, which gave the editor of Smash Hits an idea
Yes.
Of the
We're
smash
now looking
hits.
at a copy of the 1984 Smash Hits book, and I've got the 1983
that was
both
first.
edited by Neil
Anyway, I was
Tennant.
glad you had that idea because it meant one day at ITV, and then I did. You were asking me before we were recording about Betty Foster. We also did the ITV knitting book with Mary Parkinson, which Eric did all the pictures for.
Yeah.
This is Michael Barnes's missus. No.
Yes, this is Michael Barnes's missus. She was on daytime television.
Yeah.
She was on Thames, and then we did the Betty Foster dressmaking system, which I never totally really understood, but it was a thing. And Eric did the pictures for the patterns. And anyway, then one day in the office, you phoned up, Dave Hepworth phoned me up, and said, well, do I want to meet for lunch? And I thought, he's going to offer me a job. And he did offer me a job to do the Smash Hits yearbook. Then, famously, on my first day, it was announced in passing that I was the news editor.
That was just thrown in, wasn't
Just
it?
thrown in,
That's
because
right.
I was, doing the yearbook. And
Where did we meet for that lunch? Was that a place that used to be a cafe in Lexington Street that is now achingly trendy? I seem to remember negotiating with you over your opening salary, and you were going in very hard and ordering extra apple pie and custard, thinking,
and luncheon
I'm going
vouchers.
to get that.
I was always very good at lunch. Always very, very good at lunch. Still am, actually. It wasn't just the bomber, was it?
No, it wasn't actually. It was Lexington
The
Street.
Bombonera. That's
Bombonera,
right.
Carnaby
It wasn't
Street.
La Perla.
It wasn't La Perla, which was
That hadn't opened, I don't
Old
think.
Compton Street.
Yeah.
Where we used to go with our ad
La Perla
director.
was on Brewer Street or Berwick Street? Or Stephen.
Oh, okay, you might be right.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
Berwick Street. Yeah, brilliant.
We used to go with our ad director, Rod Sopp, do you remember? And they said, how do you
The
want your
late Rod
steak? And he would say, just break its horns off, wipe its arse, and slap it on the plate. And then when it came, he'd say, hang on a second. He said, do I hear lowing? A good vet could get that back on its feet in 10 minutes.
See, you'd never come across Smash Hits, but then going back...
But I knew the face. The face was very new then. But
It was new. I knew it seemed...
I was an enemy
something
reader,
against the kind of...
So what did you read? Yeah, because we were going to talk
kid.
about the pop press. We were all,
I was a
ready,
kid.
we all worked for it, and then you were eventually covered by it. So
Well,
what did you read when you were...
funny enough, in a second-hand bookshop in Morecambe on Bank Holiday Monday,
Oh, wait, well, you found each other.
we found each other, but I'd love a decaf black coffee.
Decaf black coffee.
Do you want anything along
I'm
those
all right,
lines?
thanks, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I've just done Ryland. A bound volume of The Eagle comic.
Right, yeah.
We used to read The Eagle,
Yeah.
Swift for younger readers.
Yes.
And Girl for girl, my sister.
Absolutely.
I read everything that came in the house, so we had comics like that. Susan used to get June and School Friend, which had one of my favourite comic strips of all time, The Four Marys. Four Marys was in it. Then she graduated, of course, to Jackie.
Yeah.
Maybe even still going. No?
Is it still going now?
No, probably not. Then she moved up the food chain to Petticoat,
Yes.
Janet Street Porter's first editorial job,
Yes.
which is a friend of mine. And then
Bunty?
Rave.
Rave.
She never got Bunting. The Tenants were all very pop.
Yes.
Right.
We were all very pop people. Susan was my sister was a huge fan of Paul Jones.
Yeah. Very rave.
Very rave.
Of the Manfords.
When he left the Manfred,
When he left
the
it was in Privilege.
Yeah.
We had the EP of Privilege.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. The
Yeah.
early Paul
Yeah.
Jones solo record's a really good record.
No, produced by Miley Ander, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then very early on, because I was a huge Beatles fan, as I'm sure we all were, I started buying the NME in about 1965. Do you remember they used to have adverts on the front?
Yes. Now, was it? I was thinking about this today. Was it still the New Musical Express at that point?
Or what?
It was. It
Oh,
didn't,
yes.
It didn't come in and eat a lot
And
later.
is the transition of the New Musical Express to the NME
Counterculture.
the only successful example of the rebranding of a music paper? Because people perfectly happily adopted it as the NME. Whereas the Melody Maker tried this for years, didn't they? MM.
The MM.
The Maker. Never took at all.
RM for the record mirror.
It just
Yeah,
never
it
took.
worked.
NME took.
I
didn't
think
it?
it's because new musical
Yes.
Express was A, a mouthful, and B, the express bit was sort of slightly embarrassing.
Well, everything about it. New musical sounds like a lot of old fogies.
Yeah, it sounds like
with
West
smoking
End
pipes.
theatre or something.
Yeah, it is, absolutely.
So NME, and of course, there's a radical shift in NME from the Keith Altham thing of maybe actually Penny Valentine, I don't think did write them, of sort of showbiz gossip to counterculture, i.e. Nick Kent, Charles Shaw Murray, Ian MacDonald, etc. And also teenagers walking around suburban cities in their army greatcoats and long hair with Jethro Tull albums and stuff. They wanted to get a bit more serious, man. And NME, amazingly, went from really being super show business to being super counterculture and stayed there till the end of the 80s. Even beginning of the 90s, they were still in with Manchester, essentially.
Absolutely. Who was your favourite writer? Can you remember that in the NME? Who did you like?
Charles Shaw Murray. I remember...
Can you remember any particular pieces?
Yes, I can. In 1972, when Bowie reappeared, and he was on the Old Whistle Test, my brother and I, Simon and I, stayed up to watch it. And we both immediately thought, well, that's it. It's all about David Bowie now. And that was the end of the Incredible String Band.
Yes, up till then it was string band.
And so to my friend Christel, well, that's the end of the Increds.
Yeah.
And it was Bowie. Anyway, he wrote a 2-part piece in the NME called David at the Dorchester, where he's all, the RCA is spending an insane amount of money. Bowie's being gay. And Lou Reed comes in and he kisses him, you know. But it's a very good piece by Charles Shaw Murray. So good, it carries on the next week. And Simon, actually, we shared a bedroom. Simon had this pinned up on the bedroom wall, along with many other cuttings about David Bowie. And so my first job I left college was at London Edge for Marvel Comics, which is a production editor job. But we had an art exhibition at when I first started at the ICA. And I did PR for Stan Lee. Stan Lee came over because he had a book out about how they made comics. And so I invited people. I invited Mark Bolan, and I invited...
And you interviewed Mark Bolan?
I've interviewed Mark Bolan.
Tell us about that. That's fantastic.
I decided to do a series of people, pop fans, who liked Marvel Comics simply because I wanted to be a music writer. And I thought, well, these are my magazines, I'll do what I want with them. And so I interviewed Mark Bolan in I think, 1976. Maybe 75 or 76, I can't remember. He was fat. He was still in the fat phase.
He was just about to have the TV programme.
He was just about to have one. He was actually, as we would say in Smash Hits, down the dumper.
He was down the dumper.
But he was sweet.
And the buttons on the satin shirt were stretched a bit.
And he had an album out called Futuristic Dragon.
Oh,
yeah.
Bit comic, bit Silver Surfery. So he generously did the interview. He was really, really sweet. This famous thing that I borrowed from one of the designers. We had 2 designers who worked in the office. I borrowed a cassette player, and it was pouring down when I got there, Keith Altham's office, and I put it on the table, and then he crossed the room and sat down on the sofa, and I was, for some reason, I thought it was just too uncool to actually take the cassette recorder with us. And Mark Bolan thought he's obviously an idiot or something, so he just walked across the room, got the tape recorder and put it down between us, which was very, very
and then
gracious.
repeated everything he just said, probably.
It was very... And I've still got the tape somewhere. And he was so great. He had big fat fingers like sausages. He wasn't at all delicate, like the image.
Yeah.
And he talked about Marvel Comics and like in the Silver Surfer and Conan the Barbarian and stuff. And then I was asking about if he'd ever written songs of David Bowie. He asked about the Incredible String Band. He said because he liked those heads. Called them heads, I think. And it was great. And then I did one with Alex Harvey, where we were taken by the record company, me and a friend, down to watch him in Coventry and interviewed him backstage. And then the series fizzled out.
It was a 2-part series.
Paul McCartney wouldn't do it, and neither would the Bay City Rollers.
Oh, no.
So that was that.
Going back to your Bowie feature, Charlie Murray work, it is amazing how...
So actually, Charles Shaw Murray came to that comic thing we had. Yeah.
Right. But you can still probably quote bits of that thing.
I just remember the headline, David at the Dorchester. I remember him in Kisses, Lou Reed, but Iggy Pop's probably around as well, isn't he? And
No, it's
And it was
the
very-
part-
it
the
was-
part that those things played in our lives when we were kind of teenagers.
Well-
Because if the enemy didn't arrive or whatever you happened to read, and it was on strike or whatever, the sun would just go in.
The rhythm of your
Week.
life was
Yes.
thrown by that completely.
Oh, in London, unlike the provinces, in London you could get on Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah.
Do you remember you used to
Yeah.
go to
Oxford
the news
Street.
Go to
agent
Oxford, yeah.
next to the London Palladium as well, that one?
Okay, that one.
Still there. And so you'd have it on Wednesdays, where Newcastle had to on Thursday morning. And it
Used
was
to be
a
on clothes pegs on a
highlight.
little on a string.
That's right, yeah. It was a highlight of the week.
It was.
And what's astonishing, though, is the impact and importance of written stuff, content, to one's musical taste.
Yeah.
So you read Nick Kent's review of Television's first album, Marquee
Yeah.
Moon. Well, you've got to go out and get it.
Yeah.
There's literally no option.
Well, how many thousands of people did that? I mean, it was just a...
Yeah,
So I can still quote me that
It
review.
wasn't even out when you wrote the review.
Was it?
It was in.
It was American import.
It was import.
Oh, so
It was on import for like 6 weeks before
Yeah.
they got out.
I used to phone up the New York office of Marvel Comics. I remember Bob Dylan brought out single only, double ace, double side. What's the first track from Desire? One about the
Hurricane.
boxer. Hurricane, part 1 and 2.
All right.
And they sent me it over in the bag with all the comic stuff. And of course, it didn't have a middle. American singles didn't have a middle.
No.
It was frightful. That was frightfully exciting. So yeah, but no, one's musical taste was completely defined, really.
What kind of
by
things
the
were you
enemy.
turned onto by people at the enemy?
Well,
What
I'd
would you
say,
discover?
like television, punk rock. I liked. I would buy the Clash's albums, for instance.
Punk rock was
Did you go
perfect.
to the Sex Pistols gig very early on?
Yes, I went. Eric Watson, with his art school friends, had seen the Sex Pistols, and so I went with him to see them at the Nashville in West Kensington.
Yes.
And
You wrote something.
and I wrote something. And Sid Vicious, who wasn't in the band then, of course, Sid Vicious famously beat up Nick Kent with the bicycle chain. This was a horrible incident, although you could mythologise.
Was that
it
at the
now.
Nashville?
That was at the Nashville.
Oh, right.
And there's blood, and we left. And I didn't go to a concert for about 3 years after that because it was
Dangerous.
There was an atmosphere of violence, and it was coming from Newcastle. When in Newcastle in the early 70s, it was full of skinheads who was trying to beat you up, and so I was wary about going out at night, and that reinforced it for a while, and that's what got over it.
So what did you write and where did that appear?
So I wrote a letter to the NME, very much in NME speak. If you were to see, it's actually printed in there's a book called the Sex Pistols File. I think still in print.
Right.
It's on like page 3, and they say reader Neil Tennant of London SW1. I was living in a bedsit in Knightsbridge at the time, and they put my thing saying what had happened, and also how it probably worked for Sex Pistols, obviously trying to become notorious. And Joe Smith, their photographer, happened to be there, and he had pictures. So it was quite.
So did it happen quite near you? Did you see it?
Yeah, I got the bus from Knightsbridge.
No, but the attack, Sid's attack on them.
No, it was 40 yards away. Yeah. No, it was scary. It wasn't very nice. It wasn't very nice at all. And anyway, I was thrilled to pieces that it printed in the
So your
end.
name appeared for the first time, presumably.
Reader Neil Tennant,
Yeah.
London SW.
And can you remember standing out in the street reading it?
Yes.
That's the great truth. When you first see your name in print, you just read it again and again and again.
Oh, well,
and your eyes just mist over.
No. And on Marvel Comics, on page 2, so you turn the cover over, at the bottom there are tiny credits. And it said London editor Neil Tennant. And that was the first time I saw my name in print. And I was very
You just
excited.
want everybody in the world you've ever met to
Was
see
your mother
that thing.
thrilled?
I don't know, maybe. She was, at least it was a job, because she didn't like me going to Marvel Comics, because it was obviously...
Because my mother
complete
used to go to the newsagent and just pick up a copy of Smash Hits and just make sure my name was still in there.
Oh, when I went to Smash Hits, aura of disapproval about going to this ridiculous children's music magazine, but it became a thing. We were famously on the television once on BBC Breakfast or something.
Twice?
Twice, crikey. And then You know, she was quite proud of it. And then when I left to do the Pet Shop Boys, she was horrified.
My mother used to wear Smash Hits badges. She used to wear one saying Simple Minds, which she thought really suited her. And she would hope that people would ask her why she was wearing this badge. She would say,
my
because
son's
it's from a
editor."
magazine called Smash Hits that's edited by my son. This is so touching. Those things mattered.
But on that thing of Seagull Imprint, I remember going to the CBS building in Soho Square and getting a box of the first West End Girls, which is 40 years ago this month, April 1984, and going home on the bus to the King's Road, Northern 90 bus to King's Road. And really, that was like the greatest moment of my life at that point.
Little box of 25.
Yeah, there were 12-inch records. Funny enough.
Oh, right.
They were big
Wow.
box. Actually, weirdly, I never got a lot of 7-inch records. And I had like 25 or something like that, 12-inch records. And that was just really, the ambition fulfilled at that point. I really expected to go much further. But it was really, that was really, really exciting. And I think, you know, my parents were probably quite impressed by that.
Wasn't it the 80s an amazingly good time to be a writer, don't you think?
No.
Because it was so colourful.
Doors open.
Interesting.
Pop stars were great.
Pop stars were great. There was so much success.
Without you,
Pop stars
they
were
weren't
slagging
great.
each other off. There was
Yeah.
controversy. There was colour. Also there would have been. I can't imagine another decade that would have allowed groups like Culture Club or Yazoo or whatever to materialise. Which Frankie goes on. It was an amazing decade, wasn't it?
No, it was amazing. I think, although Noel Gallagher would disagree, I think it's the last great era of pop songwriting that is looking forward.
Right.
Maybe that lingers into the 90s with Suede or something, but then it becomes suddenly it's about the Beatles, it's about the Stones, it's about the Who, it's about the Kinks in particular.
Right. Yeah.
Or it's sort of not quite pop music, it's something to do with hip hop and stuff like that. Yeah. But that sort of continuum that really isn't the 50s, it starts with the Beatles, carries on for 30 years, till approximately 1993.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing, there's still, of course, loads of great pop songs written after that, but something extraordinary was always happening. And I think it's very rare for something extraordinary to happen in pop music now. I mean, if you think of the 60s, people always say to me, what's the best decade? And although they all think I'm going to say the 80s, I always say the 60s. Because in the 60s, an unbelievable record came out every week.
The like of which you'd never heard before.
And it was like, and of course, we didn't really have any records, but it wasn't even Radio 1, but somehow you became aware of them. And once Radio 1 was around, you were much more aware of them. But we used to listen to Radio Luxembourg. We couldn't get Pirate Radio in Newcastle. But we used to listen to Radio Luxembourg. And they're just sort of amazing records, like I Can See for Miles or something, or every Beatles record, you know, and that incredible competition. John Savage had a friend who does a thing called, I think it's called The Race, and he was trying to make a CD compilation of one record followed by the reaction to it, followed by the reaction to it, and that just goes on non-stop.
No, that's a lovely idea. So the record where you can actually hear the melodies on the chords.
Right, if they're going to do that, we're going to do this.
Yeah.
So in 1967, how whimsical can you be? How heavy? 1968, how heavy can your guitar be?
Yeah.
In 1965, 6, what whimsical Victorian reference can you have? But also, how generally speaking, how weird can you be is what it is. And then weird becomes mainstream, so you've got to go weirder. And that sort of, and then you've sort of got that in the 70s with the Bowie thing and glam rock and everything, and then with punk, and then in the 80s with what remember the Enemy used to call it new pop, which wasn't a bad description. And there was a lot going. Who could go to New York and record with Arthur Baker? Who could have the biggest drum sound played by one of Chic? There's a lot of musical ambition there.
Yeah.
And sometimes musical ambition is not what I don't hear now in the same way.
It's funny, I was just thinking about the 80s this morning, and I thought to myself, am I right in thinking the Human League put out a record called The Lebanon?
They did. They did,
It was
about
a single.
1982. It was.
a hit.
It was a
It was a huge
single.
hit.
And they still
It was a
play it
hit.
in their show.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
And it wasn't controversial, was it?
It wasn't controversial. It was possibly regarded as slightly clunky.
Possibly.
But nonetheless, it was the Human League in their imperial phase. So who were
And in
we?
their infinite wisdom, it's that idea that slight arrogance that pop stars, we have an opinion on something, you're going to want to hear it because we're the Human League. But I mean, but musicians, you look back at that decade again, everyone was political. Most people were left wing, actually. Even Spandau Ballet were left wing. You know,
Johnny Marr has some story about being on the Red Wedge tour, and there's Gary Kemp. And Johnny Marr can't really speak to Gary. They're across a vast chasm of taste and indiness, and you totally sold out.
Manchester versus Italy.
But actually, of course, they get on very well because actually, in many ways, they're slightly similar people. And there they are both on the Red Wedge tour because no one, apart from Gary Newman, liked Mrs. Thatcher.
No, yeah, Gary Newman was the only one, wasn't he?
He was the only one, and of course everyone got disenchanted with Red Wedge. But
Go back to so you joined Smash Hits. What was the first thing you did then? Can you remember?
we started putting together the yearbook. I think the first thing I did was you sent me to Stockholm.
I did.
Actually, it's before. This is actually still ITV Books. I think the first piece I wrote for Smash Hits was you sent me to Stockholm to interview Squeeze, by whom I knew you were a big fan of. I knew literally nothing, so I got all the albums sent over and I dutifully listened to them. And Eric Watson did the photographs.
Really?
And we stayed in the Grand Hotel Stockholm, a very posh hotel, by the way, to this day. And we all went. The great thing about it wasn't Squeeze, much as we like them. It was that we all went to ABBA's studio.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
Where Phil Collins
was
producing Frida.
Yeah, that's right, yeah, he was.
We didn't meet Frida, but we met Phil Collins. He showed us the studio. It was very nice. He showed, basically showed Squeeze around, actually. And it was me and Eric trailing behind them. And also someone from the NME.
You interviewed, so I can remember you interviewing Culture Club and Duran Duran and
I got
Weller.
the beginning, though, was very nerve-wracking.
And
Very,
wow,
very
and I just
nerve-wracking.
wondered if you ever met those people later on. They must have commented.
Even now, to be honest.
So what do they say?
Now. I remember meeting Paul Weller at an airport. We were probably all doing the San Remo Song Festival in 1986.
Yeah.
That's where we met. I remember meeting Morrissey there, in the airport. And could be early 87, actually. And Paul Weller was sort of amazed that West End Girls had been number one in America. Because he'd obviously been told by his record company that his kind of music wouldn't sell in America because it was too English. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, West End Girl was pretty English. And he was almost baffled, I could tell, by the fact we'd done this and he hadn't been able to do it. I remember Morrissey coming over with a sort of slightly bobbed chat with Morrissey. And Gary Kemp, the Spandau on the fly, we were all going... Maybe no, that was 87. We were all going to the Brits Awards that night, or the following night, because we got an award, and they were performing To the Barricades. People sort of got over it, but they would still refer to it. But the person I hadn't seen in between interviewing him for Smash Hits in 1984 for about 35 years was John Taylor. Duran Duran, who I hadn't seen. Actually, we met John Taylor at the San Remo Song Festival as well. And but then we all went to I went to the David Hockney exhibition before lockdown, so must be 2019, at the Tate Britain. And there's Nick Rhodes, who I quite often bump into, with John Taylor.
Fantastic.
It's one of those guys. We just carried on, from 35 years previously.
Even Mark and I have this bizarre thing with people, and I think it's a unique Smash Hits thing, with people like Gary Kemp or whatever, Claire Grogan, all those people. You might not have seen them for 25 years, but they go, hello!
They do.
Hello.
Immediately.
It's as if you've never left that Smash Hits universe. Still exists. 40
But
years
also
later,
that they loved that.
but all those
Smash Hits
people are still
everyone was so affectionate
still
about it.
performing,
Yeah.
still on telly.
Because
And
it was a good vibe. It was a totally good vibe.
It really was.
We didn't. stitch people.
No, exactly.
The NME, to the very end of its print career,
Yeah.
you'd be suspicious that they were going to stitch you up.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because you then suddenly became, a musician. You were on the other side of the microphone
Yes.
being interviewed, and people were a little bit suspicious of you because you were an ex-journalist, weren't
There
they?
was to this day, people ask me, "Oh, so I think you were a journalist. You learned how to write the perfect pop song." Which and I always get the same answer. I said, "Well, you're a journalist. Have you learned that?"
Yeah.
I said, "Because what you learn about being a journalist is the press side of things.
Yeah.
So I can maybe see where your line of questioning is going, but with the music side, it's you were an observer as a journalist, and now you're sort of making the records and doing it, and it's just it hasn't got anything to do with it really. The press thing is just a small part of it.
You're so good at interviews because partly because you're just very witty and informative, but the idea that you also know what people are looking for. You know what they're trying to, what they're going to pick up on, what they're going to make into a quote.
Yes. Although, to be honest, Chris is pretty good at that too.
Yeah.
Chris is very good at also giving the gag in the interview.
Yeah.
Because I give the serious answer.
You give the long answer, he gives the short one.
And then he's
He
the
does.
funny short one.
He does a little
I did an
tiny-
interview for my lyrics book with The Guardian, and he was in our studio, and right at the end, and Chris just hijacked the whole interview. So it was right at the end, he came in and said, "Have you seen the bins outside? They've moved the bins, there's rubbish everywhere. You'll have to call the council." And of course,
That's the headline.
I immediately thought, well, if it was me, that's what it's all could just all be about. And of course, it takes up, half of the last column anyway. And then I get a text message from Adam Clayton of U2 saying, "Did you sort out the bins?"
That's very Stella. That's very kind of what do we call it? Stella Street or whatever. It's like that kind of sort of fantasy world that you probably wrote about in the Smash Hits Yearbook. We also used to do that with the Smash Hits Yearbook, didn't we? Treated everybody as a fantasy figure, and here they all are in a school or a college or a department store or whatever, turning them into.
That was the great thing about the San Remo Pop Festival, because music festival it was called, because you did get tons of people together backstage, and actually people were normally quite. It was sort of a bit of a scene. It was quite. But there was also a show in Germany called Peter's Pop Show, where it would be the same thing, and where a load of German pop stars I've never heard of, apart from Nina maybe, and again you'd all be backstage, and the whole thing took forever, and you'd be chatting. It was sort of, but it was a bit like the fantasy made real.
Yeah. Don't you miss that now?
Yes, I do.
I mean, I really do, because you've got no idea of what a lot of pop musicians are like. You've got no kind of three-dimensional sort of understanding of who they are. Whereas those like Smash Hits invented these kind of cartoon characters that they could then occupy.
Well, of course, obviously nowadays everyone's on Instagram, but that's of course their own editorial, and it's probably.
Well, it is, but you had your own editorial in a sense with those fantastic books that Chris Heath wrote about you, which were kind of based on Michael Brown's.
They were completely based on
Let Me Do, weren't they? And they were so good because you had control of them, but they just told you so much about
we negotiated every sentence of those books with Chris Heath because he's a very stubborn person.
Oh, really?
Okay, you can cut that out, but you can keep your. Well, if you cut that out, you can keep that in.
You can lose one fuck.
You can keep out the. You can keep out the bit. There's no swear words in whatsoever.
Yeah.
You can keep out the bit where we slag off you two. But it could be, things like that. But I don't know. I like that kind of reportage, and there's almost. What I can't really believe is, because talking to you two, I can't believe there's not an audience for it somewhere. That's why I don't get why that fell off a cliff.
Well, there is, but everybody became completely paranoid about their loss of control, didn't they?
That's the reason. They stopped reading.
The 80s pop stars were the most controlling in all pop. The Human League.
Yes,
they were.
Used to come in the office.
Oh, they used to come in the office and stand over the light box looking at pictures saying, you can't use that, you can't use that.
Well, I mean, Chris and I would do something pretty similar, actually. And But because people wanted... George Michael actually was probably the number one, because he was so obsessed with his image. Because I always thought George Michael looked in the mirror...
He wanted to be photographed from one side of his face at one point.
Yeah, I think he looked in the mirror and
we had a
saw
picture with an appendix
the spotty
scar.
Greek schoolboy.
Yeah, and never.
And that's not what he wants. Not what the image is meant to be.
Yeah.
And so that sort of that controlling thing went. Blur worked like that in the 90s. I don't think it's. I don't. It is because of control that it went. I mean, maybe people just lost interest in reading about it. I don't know. But I would.
Yeah, but if your enemy had not come in 1974,
It was a catastrophe.
There was nothing.
They did go on strike, in fact. Yeah.
A lot of times.
Yeah.
There was a complete pop news blackout for the period that they were gone. Doesn't apply anymore.
No.
And so, if there was a printed source, it's just one source alongside.
At the time, in Dave Rimmer's Like Punk Never Happened book, he records the shift from the weekly music press to tabloids and smash hits, and then smash hits lookalikes. That was definitely a thing. We could look over Carnaby Street and see enemy offices and think, you are going down the dive. and we have just sold 600,000 copies of our latest issue. You could only dream about that.
And so ends part one. Part two will feature Neil talking about pop's obsession with identity, why Bronski Beat was so significant, life in London when you had dyed red Bowie hair and wore women's shoes, appearing on Soul Train, meeting ABBA, Steven Spielberg and Joni Mitchell, and David Bowie's scathing one-word reviews of Michael Jackson and Oasis at the Brits. All in part two. See you there.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.